Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and we are returning to the A&E network, Walt, the Arts and Entertainment Network, the weird, I guess not new anymore, but the weird home of so much wrestling content. Way, way too much wrestling content.
Yeah, thank you for reminding what A&E stood for.
It might be like AMC now, where it doesn't stand for anything anymore, but it definitely was once upon a time the Arts and Entertainment Network. And wrestling is arguably an art and certainly entertainment. So, I mean, it does fit in that broad characterization of the network.
And they definitely have tripled down on WWE programming in the last several years.
They really have. And we've talked about it a ton. We've talked about most valuable treasures, most wanted treasures. What's that called?
They're treasures. They're fucking treasures.
The Treasure Show.
Yeah.
The very odd Treasures Show. But then, of course, there is the series that makes a lot more sense where talking about famous people comes into play. And that's, of course, their Biography series, the WWE Legends offshoot of Biography. And then this episode that we're talking about today, well, which is the Dusty Rhodes episode. So, Dusty, a full, hour and 20 minutes or so on Dusty Rhodes on A&E. I mean, it's a good series. We've done the Booker T episode before. It was very solid. I think we both gave it treat status, I believe, if that's correct. I feel like it was a treat, right?
Yes, it was a treat.
Treat adjacent. I don't have hard feelings thinking about it or dislike in my head about it, so I hope that's true. And this one, I would say again, another successful entry. Like, I think it helps that we're picking and choosing the ones with the guys we want to talk about, with the stories we haven't seen covered to death. And I think for me, that's what I liked most about Dusty. We've never really talked about Dusty in any specific way on the show, and it was refreshing to hear some stuff and see some stuff that hasn't been crammed down our throats so many times.
Yeah, I think in this case too with Dusty, you get into this dark hole of like, oh, this was such a rib on Dusty and Virgil, and it's like, I don't want to hear that shit. Like, this guy was influential. He didn't seem like he was a scumbag. And frankly, with our wrestling legends, it's kind of refreshing. I don't know. People really revered this guy, and it doesn't seem like he had any like demons outside of like, was an absentee father at certain points, but
which joined the club if you were a 70s, 80s wrestler. Like, unfortunately, they were all absentee fathers.
Right. Not
defense, just that was the reality.
But if that's his biggest like slight, I mean, he's doing far better than some of our other beloved, quote unquote, beloved legends.
Yes.
And so like I thought this presentation was like pretty great. Like, we start with Cody, we incorporate the family. The family all seems to truly like not just like love each other because like, that is what it is, but like it does seem like they all kind of rallied around Dusty, even though they had separate mothers, like the two sets of siblings, like. And so you get this really personal story, and like it was kind of nice. I don't know. That's kind of
I agree. It seems like two things that I took away from this in terms of the family stuff, which is a big part of this series, or a big part of this episode, a big part of the Dusty story. Obviously, Cody and Dustin, and then his daughters. Like they play a large role in this documentary episode, and I think it does the work because Dusty seemed like a guy who was a wrestler and was on the road, and once those years came to an end, he took stock of his existence and realized how shitty a dad he had been and all the places he'd messed up, and tried to pay penance and tried to rebuild, and it took years, and he did it. And I think so. Not only did that happen, and we hear that, but then we see his children, and they reiterate that, which I think is a refreshing thing for some of these docs. You always hear about a guy or a girl, mostly a guy, who went through some shit and then found Jesus or just came to terms with their failures and then tried to recompensate for them. But to hear and see the aftermath, like people saying, yes, that is true, that happened, and now we're all here and we love our father and we accept his failings, and like we are all tighter for it, over the course of years. I think that's really nice to see. Like it's rare, and I think it's easy to tell that story without having the proof and the pudding of showing like here's the actual family happy and better. But I think in this great story, not only is Dusty's story a good one on its own, but if you're going to expand it to that family horizon, and then you can actually prove that there is peace and there is happiness now in the Runnels Rhodes clan, that makes for a really good watch.
Yeah, and obviously he's like now regarded as like the grandfather of NXT in some ways. Like he's a father figure to like this new generation of talent that all worked with him there, and so you kind of just have this like upswell of really positive outlook on this guy from not just, I mean, obviously his family, like, not every wrestling story has a family backing you into your later years and in your, after your passing. But like this guy has literally an entire locker room full of people who are like, I owe everything to Dusty. I owe my character development and my professional development in this industry to Dusty. And so that's kind of positive, right?
Yeah, it is extremely positive. And, you and I were talking about this as one of our big takeaways before we recorded, but obviously WWE is the keeper of everything at this point. Like they have almost all the tape, all the libraries, all the history, so they get to paint their own narrative. And they can basically tell a WCW story, an NWA story, Jim Crockett Promotions, AWA, all that's at their behest, at their disposal. That doesn't always mean they're going to give people the credit they deserve. Almost all the documentaries to some extent skew WWF, WWE, but Dusty sort of stands out, and I just think it's interesting. I sort of know why. Like you said, the Dusty got involved late, so you can see why he'd become this sort of saintly figure, probably somewhat justified. But it still is interesting to me that of all the guys, all the history they can tell, like there's only a couple of people that have that rarefied air of being, born and bred outside of WWF, WWE, and now get their story told after the facts with this sort of love and dedication and raising them up. That's not a ton of people that get that treatment.
Yeah, I think you're right in that this guy is definitely put on a pedestal that you wouldn't have expected from a guy who was, to your point, so much on the opposition for most of the time. And normally I'm kind of very, very critical about certain things where I'm like, why are we skating past this? Why are we not going deeper in this? I think in this case, I'm kind of happy that we didn't like go into like the whole, Dusty was at arms with Vince and they had this huge feud in the 80s and WCW sucks so much. They suck. It's like, no, it's like this guy did some really revolutionary things and like we kind of just touch upon it a little bit. Like, yeah, they were selling out arenas. That's true. Him and Ric Flair were part of these like legendary matches. Him and Harley Race. Like, yeah, also true. He invented war games and all these other weird things that WWE just like tries to pretend like aren't great. It's like, yeah, true. And then we kind of talk about the whole polka dots thing. It's like, we didn't really like we probably overstayed our welcome in that section, but like ultimately it's like, at the end of the day, this guy's remembered, especially in like his later years, as something that like I don't necessarily want to like dig up the dirt and like it's a rib, it's Dusty and polka dots. I'm like, yeah, I don't really care anymore. I kind of like remember that fondly, and this guy had this great career before that and was like was a good booker at times and times not. And then became like the face of their development. It's like, I feel like we hit all the major points pretty well.
Yeah, and one thing, while I was watching this, and they, like you said, they do 5-6 minutes on the polka dots, and I guess you sort of gotta, because he didn't have a very distinguished, 90 to 92 or whatever his WWF career was. Like, it wasn't like he had a ton of highlights. Like, he fought Macho Man, like, he sort of was just there. But I looked it up, he was 45 years old at that point, and he was a very fat, man. So it's like, I don't know what was really the ceiling for Dusty at that point. You know, like, I think upper mid card was probably best case scenario. Like, I'm sure, you know, purists would have loved to see him recreate his Ric Flair stuff with Hogan or whatever. Like, that wasn't in the cards. Like, I'm sure Vince never thought about that, and I don't think he should have. Like, where they, even if WWF wasn't the strongest at that time either, like, you know, that was in the Hogan fights, the Giant of the Week type era, but I don't think there was really a ton for Dusty to do at that age, at that time in his career. So, like, the polka dots were silly, but, you know, Vince has put guys in much worse attire, and, you know, maybe not as distinguished guys as Dusty, but he's had ideas that were worse. And yeah, I don't think we need to harp on, like, was it a rib? Was it, like, it was Vince being Vince. He does weird shit. I'm sure he felt strange toward Dusty, given Dusty's, you know, previous, you know, 10 years of being his foe. And Vince did some bullshit, and Dusty rose above it to a certain extent. Like, that's really all there is. And we don't need to also hear about how Vince named DiBiase's slave character after Dusty. Like, it's not. That is probably true, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't need to be part of this retelling of the Dusty story.
Yeah, and honestly, the whole polka dots thing is kind of an indictment on Vince as a creator, because it's like you had this guy who clearly resonated with so many people at certain points in certain regions. It's like, and even like Bruce Pritchard's like, yeah, and then Vince came to me once and said polka dots. It's like, really? Like, that's you know, maybe there was a reason for doing that, but like ultimately, it's like, wow, you kind of squandered. Like, maybe you do something else and you make some money with this guy. Yeah, he's old, and yeah, what else is he gonna do? But like, you know, if anything, they paint Dusty in this picture of like, instead of him being the butt of the joke, it's like, yeah, he took a shitty idea and we fucking made it kind of work a little bit. And then I left and then like almost outbooked Vince to oblivion. Like,
yep.
You know, like it doesn't necessarily make WWE look like such revolutionaries because it's like, well, Dusty was selling out arenas across the Carolinas, but the rest of the world didn't really know. It's like, well, yeah, those guys put this guy in polka dots, so I don't know who's worse. You know, like,
yeah, you got maybe the hot, like, one of the most recognizable free agents in an era where there really wasn't a ton of free agents. You know, you got someone with legitimate appeal, like, maybe in certain parts of the country only, but still, he was a hero in a lot of parts of the country, and you fuck up the gimmick. Like, that's totally you being an idiot. It's you running a bad company. If you're going to shoot your acquisition in the foot from day one to prove a point or to assert your dominance, like, there's no way then or now to sell that as like something funny or cool or good. That's just idiotic.
But did we need 4 acts kind of dissecting it? And did Vince and Dusty like each other? Not. It's like, you know, I don't even really care anymore. Like,
Vince wasn't a big part of the Dusty story, you know? Like, Vince and Dusty didn't seem... I'm sure it was fun to see young Vince interviewing Dusty and talking sort of with Dusty's twang, like, and we got the dream, Dusty Rhodes. Like, it was fun. I enjoyed seeing young Vince try and keep up with Dusty, but beyond that, I don't think he's not like, you know, there for the key moments.
No. And, you know, you forget that this guy sold out Madison Square Garden. It's like, yeah, why the fuck? What are we doing here, guys?
Yeah. But, like, to your point, though, it's great that we get a rare documentary like this that allows the non-WWF WWE parts to feel important, you know? Like, that doesn't shortchange them. They're not 20 minutes of an hour-long documentary. They're 40 minutes of a longer than hour documentary. Like, they are the meat of all this, and that's good because Dusty mattered. You know, like, you don't have to wipe the slate clean and make it seem like you were the only people in town. Like, Dusty and Flair, I know it is. They're the only two who really get this treatment in a lot of ways, but it still is good to acknowledge every now and then that other people around the world pushed the business forward in their own way, and maybe they didn't stand the test of time, but they matter. And Dusty's one of those guys, and like, it is compounded by the fact that he does seem like a really nice man, and like you said, and contributed to so many other lives. Like, he's just the perfect person to tell that, to put allow those add-ons to be part of the story. Doesn't mean they're always going to do it, though. So the fact they do it here and let it be is very satisfying.
Yeah, and also seeing your boy Terry kind of
Oh my god.
give Dusty that I will say
Another
though,
guy
that,
trying
like,
to do the Dusty voice in this and fails horribly.
oh god, yeah.
No one else should do the Dusty voice. It's only Dusty who should do that. Or you could do an impression of Dusty, but you shouldn't make yourself into like Dusty Light. That is not a good idea.
No, but I mean that is one of the greatest like things you could say. One of the greatest compliments is like Hogan tried to steal Dusty's gimmick.
Yeah.
Because he did it a lot better, and it seemed to work really well. But it's like, yeah, the fact that like so you think about Hogan, like I guess it's our people of our age, but like think about Hogan and Dusty, it's like they both kind of live in this era together. But to your point, like, you know, Dusty was a generation before Hogan and influenced Hogan and was in the Florida territory for a long time. So like, you know, it's funny to think about it. Like, that'd be like Roddy Piper influencing Ric Flair or vice versa. It's like, to me, they're all the same like era. And it's like, no, actually, I watched a lot of Dusty Rhodes, and that's why I became Hulk Hogan. It's like, oh, that's kind of nuts to think about.
Also, Terry giving someone else praise that isn't like couched in his own praise, you know, or isn't reflecting back on him is wild too, because that's not a thing Terry does very well. But I think it illustrates like Dusty was not a threatening, you know, if you're looking at Hulk Hogan, you're looking at Dusty Rhodes, like you can see some character elements, you know, some of the bravado, the outsized interviews, like some of that influence is certainly probably carried over. But again, Dusty was a big fat guy. Like Dusty had his own thing. Like he had his own voice, he had his own style, he had his own mannerisms, like he had his own look. Like it just did not infringe on the big swole guys, the guys with long hair, the handsome guys. Like he just operated in his own corner that was his own. And I think that allows a guy like Terry, who is, you know, always so scared and so clearly intimidated and full of bluster and bullshit. I think no one felt intimidated by Dusty, because how could you really? Like, he wasn't encroaching on your turf. He had his own turf. And it's just, I feel like that's just the uniqueness of him, I think, allowed him to stand alone and be appreciated by everybody, because he wasn't stealing your money. Like, you were just hoping probably to work with him because you're like, shit, let me get some of that Dusty rub on me, you know? Like, yeah. I can't be Dusty, and I learned that pretty quickly, so I might as well just let him be him and be me. Like, I just think it's nice when you can't be copied the way he couldn't be copied.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty unique circumstance. You're right, because like Hogan doing Dusty doesn't feel like a ripoff of Dusty because Hogan was super jacked to the gills, but like
and bald, yeah. And you know all these other things that Dusty just was not and couldn't really be.
Right.
And didn't try to be. Like, he was just Dusty, you know. He never really had gimmicks or switches or anything. It seems like he was occasionally a good guy, bad guy, but once he had that run with Flair, he just became like beloved Dusty, I feel like, and that was him for the next 20 years.
He seemed pretty beloved in those highlights with Superstar Billy Graham.
Yes, that's true. It was before Flair, you're right, yeah. Similar vibe, like a brash, you know, preening heel versus good old Dusty. It seemed like once they hit that formula, it was just off to the races.
Also, didn't realize that the whole son of a plumber was a shoot.
Yeah, also
a lot of his story that's a character that's a shoot. It's
yeah. Like, there's an authenticity there, and they touch on another thing the documentary does well, and I think it is interesting, is they touch on Dusty's influence on the black community and on black fans, and you know how a lot of black fans looked at him as, you know, a relatable character, and maybe not one of their own, but I think they give that sort of general impression that, like, you know, the closest you were going to get maybe in the late 70s to a black wrestler was a guy like Dusty, who at least seemed like he was from a similar type of situation, who just had some relatability to him. And like, I think they did a pretty good job of incorporating that in without laying it on too thick, you know? Like, it's because Dusty wasn't black, obviously, at all, so it's not like it would be a lot to act like he was the savior of black fans. But I think there is that relatability to him, there is that authenticity, there is that realism that he exuded that was genuine, and I think that did come across to fans who it didn't feel like you were watching a character. It wasn't. It was Dusty just turned up to 11, and like back in the day, like that just, I don't think a lot of guys had that sort of vibe in the 70s and 80s, like just being yourselves, like Dusty and Flair did. But yeah, I think that they were very ahead of their time, and Dusty was a real, you know, trendsetter, I think, in being big and brash, but having it be real.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like the Hard Times promo. I'm like, what part of this is about pro wrestling anymore? You know what I mean?
It's very rambling. It's so fun to watch that too, because like he sort of loses track. Like he's talking with a lot of intensity, but yeah, it's not even like it's not scripted in the least, and it doesn't really tie back to I'm facing Ric Flair next week. It's just like talking about the state of the country,
speaking to people about and finding common ground. I guess I don't, but it's just like that's kind of the vibe he was giving, and through those promos that really had nothing to do with wrestling, a lot of people ended up relating to him more in some weird way because he was speaking to like a greater common frustration or something. It's weird. It's weird to watch that where I'm like, I don't know if you could do that like in 2023 or do it to that level that Dusty did.
Yeah, I don't like even if you somehow could establish a connection with the fans where they believed you or they knew your story, because now you wouldn't even be able to kayfabe it. Like everyone would know every inch of where you came from. But yeah, I don't think if you started just talking about life and economic opportunity and being disenfranchised, like would the fans even care? Like I don't it feels like a risk in a weird way, you know, for lack of a better term, that he took because he knew who he was and he knew what his fans wanted. But yeah, it doesn't like every wrestling promo is like that. The promo is like Ric Flair is a bad man who is like part of the problem in society, and that's a big leap to take when you're just trying to pitch a wrestling match.
Yeah, I can't even think of an equivalent, like, but it is reminiscent of like Cody Rhodes promo sometimes where he's like telling a big ass story about something. I'm like,
and doing a much worse job. You know, there's very hit or miss at least.
Well, I saw more parallels in this rewatching than I probably wanted to, but
yeah, Cody doesn't really. I mean, no one can do what Dusty did. You know, like it's a time and a place thing and a guy thing. Like there's been 40 years since him to a certain extent, since his peak, and no one has recaptured that, and no one is really trying, and I think that's good. Like I think that's a win. Like I would love to see a modern version of it or an adaptation of it or something that pivots like that. And like I said, Cody makes the most sense as his son and just someone who likes that sort of, I think, theatricality, that real theatricality, like I'm being loud, but I'm also telling the truths. But I don't, it's like even that comes off as pretty hackneyed, I think, like he gets away with it if anything because he's his son. And you're like, well, it's Dusty's son. Like he's trying his best, he's doing a new version of it that doesn't really work.
Right, yeah. There's a time and a place, and I guess those Jim Crockett promotion fans really all were of the same economic like status because everyone's like, yeah, this is fucked up. Yeah,
I think Flair is such a good Dusty opponent too. Because like I really think I think it's as much as Dusty was a good guy back then, and speaking to the common man, Flair now what Flair does is seems I think so modern. Like if you look at it through a modern lens, you're like, oh, Ric Flair's just trying to be cool, like and trying to show off. But like back then, Ric Flair was the biggest piece of shit in the world. Like Ric Flair was a total asshole who was rich and hated you and thought you were trash and would go out there every night and tell you how much you sucked. Like I just think we know Ric Flair. Like now no one would ever boo Ric Flair ever, even in 2023 when there are a lot of reasons to probably boo Ric Flair. Like he's just such a treasure. But man, his whole thing was I am awful and like I'm every rich guy you hate, and it was an era where I think that especially in that part of the country where rich guys like that who drove limousines all the time were pieces of shit, and Dusty was like I hate this, and everyone just sort of got behind it. Like I just don't think that could really translate anymore. Like there are very few. There's not so many rich guy characters anymore that are openly despised like they were in the 80s. And
did Flair and Dusty ever have like legitimate beef, or were they always pretty much tight through those like Four Horsemen runs?
They don't really. Flair was really not featured in this very much. So
I had the same thought too, because I'm like, I think they were cool. Like I think they did business well. Like I don't think there was ego, but maybe there was, and like maybe that's what forced Flair to leave. I can't remember. Like
yeah.
I've read so much. I fucking even know.
I can't. I really don't remember either. But they certainly were diametrically opposed in philosophies,
The
wrestling
character. Yeah.
philosophies. So
Right.
I'm sure I never got the vibe that I don't recall ever reading that they were explicitly against each other. But it would have fueled the interviews and the promos and such if they we're not pals, that wouldn't blow my mind. Like you just like when you hear a guy from then, or especially when you see a Cody come and like they love doing like the old guy young guy sort of thing. And like Flair and Cody, I know they interacted back in the day, but I don't recall them being as tightly knit as you'd think they might be, given how they treat other guys, other legacy people who interact with their father's peers. Like I don't recall a ton of connections being made there. So who knows?
No, no, I had the same thought though. I'm like, I don't remember. Flair's like, Dusty's the best. He's just the best. And then like that was it. I'm like, okay, want to elaborate on your ability to woo millions and make money and send your ass in a helicopter and Starcade. Like, I don't know. It seemed pretty important. Seemed like there's more to talk about there, but we didn't, and I guess we're gonna leave it. But again, maybe there's nothing else to say. Maybe and that's what I kind of liked about this. It wasn't really, we didn't really linger on anything too much. I learned a little bit about Dusty that I didn't know, and like
I also wouldn't be surprised if A&E was like, hey, that sex pest who is intimately involved in the story, let's like move past him as fast as we can, let's not touch on him a ton in this Dusty doc because we don't really want to talk about him on the A&E network today.
Yeah, that's true. That might be a concerted effort to
perhaps
bury it.
We'll never really know. But
yet Hogan, however,
they did have Hogan, that's true. That's another. We should talk about quick too the Dustin parts of this story. Like Cody gets. They sort of bookend this with Cody's return, which is old news at this point. Like I remember watching this. I was like, shit, Cody came back a year and 3 months ago. Like, damn, that was time really flew from Cody's return. And they use that as the story, which is great because that was a huge deal. And Cody obviously is a bigger star than Dustin at this point, all things considered. With with his impact and moving around companies and all that kind of stuff. But Dustin is a huge part of the Dusty story, especially when they go back into the early 90s and they sort of show you the Dustin coming up in wrestling, the way he was so tied to Dusty, the issues they were sort of working out on screen throughout the 90s, literally with Dusty and Dustin interacting, and then Dustin's whole Gold Dust run, which is just shit daddy issues and giant letters over top of it. Like it's a big part of the story, and also it's really helped again by Dustin being calm, cool, and collected with like his family and with his life, and like he just seems very at peace with it, and I think he's able then to look back with a lot of clarity on all the crazy shit that went down over the decades.
Yeah, we really just skated past the whole Gold Dust of it. I guess we could do a whole Dustin.
We haven't really talked about Gold Dust a ton either, have we?
No, but there's a Gold Dust book, so
oh god, there is a Gold Dust book, isn't there?
I'm very much inclined to uncover that.
We've never talked, like Gold Dust has never been in the title or even the mention like of an episode. Like we've never talked about Gold Dust at all, really.
All I'll say for now, in the context of the Dusty doc, is I think that guy needed it. I know like he left and became Gold Dust for like reasons they kind of skirt by, like, they had issues and I had to choose between my wife and my father. It's like, that's a weird situation that kind of just happens. But yeah, I mean, I've heard of that story, so whatever. Like we probably kind of elaborated on that, but who knows? I think that guy needed to be Gold Dust though. He just couldn't just keep being fucking the Natural.
Yep.
Like the Natural wasn't doing that guy any favors as a legitimate wrestling guy. Like
no, the gimmick of I'm Dusty Rhodes' son just made things worse, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Hey, you remember that dad who's really never been around your entire life and you harbor a lot of secret resentment? Like now he's on screen with you all the time and he's your best friend. Isn't that great? Right. No, it's my inner turmoil is through the roof.
Also, the Goldust character, for whatever you want to say, and I'm glad we didn't just make this a whole like this was clearly a Ray Bone Dusty. Like maybe it was. I don't fucking know. That character gave this guy like a platform to be different, and I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, Goldust character is riddled in issues, in hindsight, but like he was a top talent at the time, and he turned that fucking gimmick into like, I never really thought of him as Dusty's son for a long time.
No, when we were like 13 years old, like I know I was thinking that in watching this doc, and then they cut to a clip of him in Dusty's polka dots, and I was like, okay, well, obviously at a certain point they threw, I don't want to say subtlety, but they threw that element hard into the fire and said, by the way, he's fucking Dusty's son. Alarms going off. But for the longest time, it was just a ridiculous character that that Dustin was just getting a lot of stuff out with.
Yeah, but he got over in anyways, yeah.
It's one of the most famous gimmicks of the 90s, and I think in some ways because it was controversial for the sake of being controversial, but in some ways it's because it was a wrestler who, stepping out of the shadow of sort of a pre-planned life gimmick that he didn't really probably want any part of, and trying weird shit out and seeing if it stuck, like doing something outrageous because that's what he wanted to do. Like, no one put a gun to his head and made him be Goldust. Like, he wanted to do something different. It was his little rebellion, and it was amazing in its own way. And like, it's a testament to Dustin's skill as a performer. Like, he's not Cody. Like, he never was really a heavyweight title contender. He's not Dusty. He isn't a beloved legend who they'll make hour and a half documentaries about down the line, but he is a Hall of Fame talent and who had his own niche, and once he figured out what that was, it sort of just went from there.
And this guy had many different like iterations of this Goldust character throughout the years, and became like an R-Truth level beloved character in some ways. Yes. And then came back and played it straight, and it was great again. Well, as Goldust? Yeah, when he came back for the Rhodes Brothers run, he just was in the makeup, but he was just pretty much Dustin Rhodes in makeup, Right, yeah. He transcended what this original gimmick and just became, like, Goldust became its own, like, endearing character in some ways, which is, like, kind of remarkable. And also, too, like, yeah, he was in the Goldust getup, and no one batted an eye. No one was like, oh, this is, like, so stupid or weird. It was like, yeah, I want to see fucking Goldust, like, beat the shit out of Roman Reigns, which I never thought, it's a hilarious thing to say in 10 years removed. And he wasn't blowing him kisses. He wasn't doing anything overly offensive. He wasn't playing the character that made him that was so over the top. He was just, he was a wrestler, and he came back and had a legit, like 4 or 5 year run where he was just one of the guys again, and it worked perfectly. Oh, dude, that 2013 iteration of Goldust might have been one of their better workers. Yeah. And I know it sounds funny, and I'm saying it with like a smirk, but it's kind of true. It's kind of very true. He was just so crisp at that point, like he was just executing. Like he was just so talented. He was in shape. He was in the best shape he'd been in decades, and like he just knew inside and out what to do in a wrestling match, and that showed. Like that Rhodes Brothers versus the Shield feud was, did not go on for a long amount of time. But if you're talking like 1-2 pay-per-view feuds of the 2010s, it might be the best one they've ever done at that time. Like they sort of backed into it, and it just was gangbusters. It was perfect. Yeah, that match was, I don't know what rating system you go on, but that's a 5-star match. Oh, it has to be. It's everything you could ever want from a match. Like it's the most, Dusty is, they're not getting fired. Dusty's not being sent home or whatever, but you still want to see it happen because they're legit underdogs. Goldust is old, Cody's unproven, they're up against these mercenary guys who are cool as hell, and they pull it off anyway. And Dusty gets involved and does the elbow. Dean stole that elbow like $1 million too. I love seeing that clip. Like that must have been so fun for Moxley to take that out. I think he probably said in his book. I do recall that coming up, and everyone being like, again, like we were saying, the NXT guys of that era just were like Dusty. The FCW guys, they're like, Dusty's God. We're so happy. I'm sure bumping for Dusty must have been a dream come true. They were probably like, because the Shield was very like effectively unionized, like as learned in John Moxley's book. But I think they were more than happy to job in that instance because of Dusty's involvement. And you go on the record books. Not that WWE has like actual legitimate record book. Maybe they do. I don't know. Like the Shield's first loss was to these two guys telling this story in this way. Yeah. Not even for the titles, just to win their fucking jobs back and like family pride. Like that's pro wrestling. You know what I mean?
And again,
like,
you look like not a fool, but like you take a bump from a silly move from an old man and you do it with gusto, like it's the best thing you ever could do. Like there was no pride there. Like everyone at that point was so ready to go. And like you said, I bet they would have walked out if Vince was like, "You're winning this match." They'd be like, "Absolutely, we're not. There's no way." Like that makes no sense in the story. That hasn't stopped Vince before, but it's not the story call, and it's just not the call. Like this is their time.
Yeah, the Shield were beating teams of John Cena and Daniel Bryan and Kane, and like they were beating everybody back then.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they allowed this storyline to culminate with, like, at the time Cody Rhodes was a mid-level talent at best, and Goldust was Goldust.
Yeah.
And so
it wasn't like now 10 years later where we look back and go Goldust. It was like, oh, Goldust? All right.
Yeah, and so
there's a chance Cody is not even Cody if he doesn't get that feud too,
Yeah.
That made him a legitimate talent in my mind, at least as someone who was sort of getting back into it around that time. I was like, this is cool as hell, and Cody's doing his job,
Yeah.
He's a key cog.
That did put him on the map because I think he was dashing and doing all this bullshit before.
He was post-Legacy just dicking around, I feel like, and that gave him some purpose again. He lost that purpose soon after, unfortunately, but I think that really put him back in the conversation of, like, this guy is a future star. We just got to figure out what to do next. And then they never really did, but...
Well, yeah, then they made him Stardust, and that was clearly
which
not...
is its own thing. But it is a really good example, too, of a feud like that didn't ultimately go anywhere or do anything beyond get those guys, a little more of a rub. But we don't care about that. Now that it's over, it is an actual example of, like, the proof that, the 4 months of a full arc, that was a mini arc within... ostensibly a other Cody, Goldust, whatever you want to look at it, Rhodes Brothers arc, but the rest of the arc doesn't matter. They had their one moment, they had their shining thing. What they did after the facts is just is a footnote to the main moment that we all care about.
Yeah, A+ storytelling, A+
incredible
execution in the ring.
Yeah,
those guys put on a fucking clinic. Great job.
And I think that's, stuff like that is why I think Dusty gets this, is canonized now, and is an angel, and is, a hero to so many people. Like, they did a really, the respect he got for his NXT run, for being that trainer, for having this rich legacy, decades of being this unique man in wrestling. And then I think just that elder statesman thing he got to do at the end, where he was involved a little bit, and he just mattered, And again, kudos to Vince, who does not always do this right, but when, like, he did not have to he doesn't do this for so many people. And the fact that he gave Dusty these opportunities and, puts these docs out and lets everyone speak candidly about a guy they clearly loved outside of the ring for his contributions to their lives and otherwise, and allows that to be tied together with, and this is why his in-ring career and his training and everything matters. Like, I don't know exactly why Dusty gets that rarefied air, but I do, like, he seems like a great guy, and it seems like a rare, deserved moment where you're like, this is a good man who fought his demons weren't the same as other people's, but he fought his, his failures, he fought the things he messed up along the way. He came back around the other end and was just a saint and deserves the praise that we're all heaping on him after the fact.
Yeah, I'd say that kind of sums up all of our thoughts, right? It's just like, it's just nice that he has his place in history and on A&E as this beloved character and figure that everybody, like, thinks very highly of.
And it's nice to watch, like, it's nice to hear the story that we don't know to death, right? Like, it's nice to get educated on something that is not warmed over constantly. Yeah,
we uncovered some new ground, which is always good in my eyes.
Yeah. I will say, what do you think? We haven't watched a ton of these, but what are your thoughts on this biography sort of subset on WWE guys? How many of them have you seen at this point? Have you only seen 2? Have you seen Booker and now Dusty?
I feel like I've seen more, but maybe I'm confusing them with 24.
There is a lot.
Or rivalries.
Or icons, like the Icon series on WWE Network is very similar to this, so, which we've talked about, Yoko and other ones. So
when you said there was a new doc on A&E, the Dusty doc, I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, whatever. You seem excited, so let's just go with it.
But then you had asked me which one I was talking about.
Well, yeah, because there's a few, but
Oh, we watched the Warrior one too. That was a biography.
Did we?
Yeah, remember the Warrior one 2 years ago?
No, I don't.
Yeah, we watched Dark Side and Biography, and we mushed them together into one.
Oh right, yeah.
Which
That
I don't
seemed
think
like
had
a good
the same.
thing on paper. Yeah.
I don't think it was the same. I mean that we knew that one inside and out, so I think that probably didn't help.
Right. But I mean, overall, these are good. They clearly put the time in. They put the they get the right booking. They talk to enough people. They have enough. They're long enough where they don't overstay their welcome, or they're short enough where they don't overstay their welcome, and they're long enough where they cover enough of the topic and the grounds. So I don't know.
My hot take is I like this more than Dark Side at this point. I'd rather watch a biography episode than a Dark Side episode.
I think so. I would say that's accurate.
Not all of them. That's the one I will offer that caveat. Like I said, if we get the luxury of picking and choosing. If you made me sit down and watch, I don't even know what the hell they're doing. I know there's a Yokozuna one. I'm sure that's fine. But I mean, I can't imagine they're all excellent. But I think I like this presentation a little more. Like I think I'm more into, even though it is WWE branded, Dark Side, as we talked about in the last episode, like I think they just they have a very strict template, and I feel like at least this Dusty episode, as an example, just felt like it wasn't necessarily a deviation from a template, but there was more of a story there, and they aired it out and told it a little better than I think having to sort of fit it into a mold that already existed.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I mean, again, there's
an NWO episode, and I don't think we want to watch that. So
no, I don't want to do that. That would be retreading old ground.
Yes, very much so. But Jake the Snake, though, I bet Jake the Snake's pretty good.
Yeah,
we know that story pretty well from previous episodes, but maybe there's more. I could see if they allowed Jake. I mean, they have the access. If they told early '80s Jake, maybe get a little bit into pre-WWF Jake, that'd be interesting.
Maybe. I don't know. Let's
watch more of them before I guess we canonize it itself and say this is a good thing. Yeah,
I would say let's see what else is out there. Let's not just go back to the biography right away.
We're not going to watch Charlotte or China or Paige or Yokozuna. I think we're going to skip
Charlotte.
Yeah, Charlotte got one. Which I don't understand how that works. Charlotte's like 38, 35 years old. Like, we're doing a Charlotte documentary already.
She's that old?
I mean, she's pretty old, I think. She's been around for a while.
I know that.
Charlotte is 37 years old. I was right.
Maybe I need to watch the biography and learn more.
That's right. Well, regardless of whether this is an actual, top tier doc series, this was a good episode. Dusty's a good story, and it's a good time for it with Cody. The way they put it together was very well done, and that's all we ask for on the show, Walt, is just a well done piece of wrestling entertainment.
Was it a treat?
I'm gonna say a clear treat. I'm gonna say it's a chocolate covered pretzel. It was delightful.
Wow. Okay. Oh, now we're qualifying our treats. Okay.
I was just trying to think of a unequivocal, treat that we all like.
So the Booker T one was a peppermint.
Yeah, it was a peppermint
patty.
It was a peppermint
patty, where
a York. It was a York.
Not everybody's favorite treat, but it was somewhat semi-sweet.
Yeah,
morsel treat.
It's candy. It was candy. We couldn't deny that. It was a sweet item. But is it a specialty one? Probably. But this was good. This was a hit, right? You liked it too.
No, yeah, I just now I'm trying to qualify how much I like chocolate covered pretzels.
We started that last episode now too, so now we got to start diving more into this.
I thought the last episode we just described things as just like shit covered.
Oh, that's right. Well, we're quantifying the grading system across the board, right? We're burrowing into it. 156 episodes in.
Yeah, well, this is ripe for parody, I'm sure. So. Or this is parody, I guess. I don't even know.
Well, it's a treat, and if you have access to A&E Biography, I think it's worth your hour and 20 minutes. So the Awesome Truth stamp of approval.
Yes.
That's what it gets for sure.
I concur with that.
If you want to hear a little more, us talk about A&E series, the Rivals series, the aforementioned Booker T episode, you can find all of those episodes in our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can also find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, everywhere podcasts are delivered. Awesome Truth is there. You can subscribe, rate, review us, all that good stuff. Get us out there to the people. And, of course, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, great to talk Dusty with you. Delightful new story, newish story, relatively untreaded territory, and an uplifting little wrestling tale, which is great.
I feel like I got all my Battleground 2013 talking points out, so I feel pretty good.
We get one, and we also have a candidate for a rewatch someday. If we want to do that match we just raved about, right? Let's see when Battleground 2013 took place. That was in October. Okay, well.
Was it? Well, I assume summer for some reason.
I think B Ground is like a total like plug and play back then. You know, like whenever they had room, they were just calling it B Ground.
Okay. Well, yeah.
So this October we can do this match, or we can do Hogan and the Giant when they have the monster trucks on the roof. The two greatest October matches of all time.
It's a real tough call.
And the Yeti, all that good stuff.
Oh my God.
We'll just wait, fans, for October. Imagine what delights will be awaiting you in a few short months on Awesome Truth. It'll be great.
Yeah, I'm excited for October.
Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.